Welcome to the Healthy Heart Show, where we pull back the curtain on conventional medicine and dive into the root causes of cardiovascular health. If you are concerned about high cholesterol, high blood pressure, heart attacks, stroke, or atrial fibrillation, this is the place for you. We will provide natural heart information that will help you prevent, treat, and reverse any ailment, leaving pills and procedures out of the picture. Here are your guides to holistic heart health, board-certified cardiologist and Amazon best-selling author, Dr. Jack Wolfson, and natural heart doctor, naturopathic physician, Dr. Lauren Lattanza. Hello and welcome to the Healthy Heart Show. I am Dr. Lauren Lattanza, naturopathic physician here at Natural Heart Doctor, where we are always working to get you to your 100-year heart, bringing you all kinds of opinions, all kinds of information, and how to live your longest and healthiest life, leaving pills and procedures out of the picture and getting to the root cause, getting to your best holistic approaches to medicine. We have an excellent guest for you today. We are bringing to you Dr. Jason Fung. Dr. Jason Fung, MD, is a nephrologist who has become a world-leading expert on intermittent fasting and low-carb dieting, especially in treating people with type 2 diabetes. He has become incredibly multifaceted and now is a best-selling author, having written The Obesity Code, The Complete Guide to Fasting, The Diabetes Code, The Longevity Solution, Life in the Fasting Lane, The PCOS Plan. And I know that there's cookbooks to go along with all of these. So much information that he's brought to us. I have personally been a fan and follower of his work for years now, and I'm just delighted to bring him to our audience. He knows that surgeries and pharmaceuticals are not solving the chronic medical issues and has a lot of great information on his website at thefastingmethod.com. Welcome to our show, Dr. Jason Fung.
Thanks so much, Lauren. Thanks for having me here.
So kind of if we could just get a little bit of background information on you, because not all nephrologists practice the way you do or see things the way that you do. So how did your journey in the medical field begin?
Well, I was trained at UCLA for nephrology, and I practiced pretty 18 years of my career. But as things went on, I started to be a little bit dissatisfied with how things went, because we're seeing a lot of issues with type 2 diabetes predominantly, because that's a big cause of kidney disease. And things were not really getting better. There's more and more people who are developing type 2 diabetes, which meant more and more people were getting the kidney disease, which is why I was seeing them. And really, when I started to really think about it, the way we were treating it was sort of all wrong, because everybody at the time was saying that type 2 diabetes was sort of this chronic and progressive disease, but it actually wasn't true, because everybody knew, I mean, doctors knew, patients knew, everybody knew that if you lost weight, your diabetes would either get better or go away. Mm-hmm. So this idea that it was sort of chronic and progressive was simply a lie, really. And it was probably a lie that physicians, we told ourselves so that we'd feel better about not getting them better, right? So it was, but nevertheless, when you tell people that it's chronic and progressive and there's nothing you can do, you sort of are not telling the truth, and you're not really giving them, the people that really want to make a change, you're not really doing them any favors. So that's where I really started to get interested in that topic of how to lose weight, because it really was a huge issue for any medical disease. So it's well known that it's a risk factor for heart disease and strokes and cancers and diabetes and joint pain. And so many different chronic diseases are related to weight. And yet, as physicians, we sort of had given up that field. We gave it up to like Weight Watchers and Jenny Craig sort of thing. So it was very strange to me why we would do that, because it's a really important determinant of health, and we really just didn't have any idea what to do with it. And I think a lot of it was due to our training. And that's where I started to talk about sort of weight loss and, how a lot of the stuff that we had been advocating, which is just looking at calories and counting calories and so on, I mean, it didn't really work. Like all this stuff that we had been saying, which is just count your calories, get an app and count your calories, or do more exercise and count your calories. It just wasn't working. So no matter what we thought about it, it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. And that's where I started talking about other things like low carbohydrate diets and also intermittent fasting, which is something that had been severely in disrepute by the time I had started using it in about probably about 10 years ago now. And of course, when I started using it, literally everybody thought I was insane. Everybody sort of knew that it was the worst thing you could possibly do to your body. And if you skip breakfast, you would die and all this sort of stuff. And it was quite hysterical because when I started to look at the physiology and the literature, it was clear that there was nothing wrong with it. That is, if you have excess body fat is a way for your body to store excess calories. That's what you do. You eat, you take in calories. If you have too many of them, you have to store it somewhere. So you store it as body fat. So if you want to use it, then obviously you have to, fasting is a way that you're not going to eat anything and your body will simply take those calories out of storage and then you'll use them. And nothing bad happens in between because that's literally the reason you have body fat. It's not there for looks. It's there for you as a store of calories.
Mhm.
So, to use them, to set up a condition like fasting where your body is, able to use it is not bad. It's actually very good. And it turns out there's a lot of good side effects and side benefits of fasting, including, type 2 diabetes, for example. If you don't eat, your body will use up some glucose because it's a source of energy. Hey, if you're using up glucose, then that's a good thing because your body has too much glucose. So not very difficult to understand. And it was quite striking because as I started to use this and started talking about it, some people were getting just incredible results. Like they're just like coming off their medications, their diabetes was reversing. It was just incredible, and losing weight. So that's where I started to talk about it a lot more, just because it was such a hysterical sort of this anti-fasting sentiment at the time. It's obviously changed. I wrote the Obesity Code, and I think it was released in 2016, so it's almost 5-6 years old now. So, but at the time, it was quite,
Oh,
there was a lot of hysteria around it. I'll tell
why would we
you.
starve ourselves? Yeah. Yeah. And I would imagine working in nephrology, like you said, you're seeing these patients, these diabetic patients that are kind of at the end of the road. It's like, all right, well, now they've got this chronic kidney disease. And then you have this wealth of information saying otherwise, that no, intermittent fasting, having these periods of caloric deficit is what's going to help you. And maybe not every person is the one that wants to implement these changes, because maybe it's not easy, especially with the, the insulin resistance and the blood sugar picture that they currently had. It might be pretty hard to get started. So did you find that a lot of your patients were open to the idea of bringing fasting on?
Yeah, I mean, luckily, a lot of them had known me for a while, and they, trusted me that I was going to tell them what was good for them, and so a lot of them did listen to me, luckily, and therefore they did it, and some of them got better. Not everybody did, of course, because it's not particularly fun. So, but the people who are motivated to do it, they could do it, and certainly those that did it, most of them saw some level of success. Keeping it up is a difficult thing in this sort of day and age, especially this was many years ago when everybody else was telling them that they shouldn't do it, right? That I was crazy. So it was difficult, although it's gotten better in time, and that's where I started to try and reach out to people and write more about it and speak at medical conferences, talking about the sort of physiology of what happens during fasting and why you really shouldn't be afraid of it.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, the physicians immediately saw what I was sort of talking about because they knew the physiology. And, in fact, most of them were like, oh, yeah, I used to do this all the time in residency. I didn't have time, so I didn't eat. And, I was pretty skinny back then. Right. So that's, a lot of them sort of understood the logic immediately. There's a lot more resistance from sort of the allied health professionals and the people on the internet and so on. So it was considered sort of this extreme diet and so on. And it's funny, it got called like a fad and all this sort of stuff, which was interesting again, because fasting is not something I just made up. It's
Right.
been around for thousands of years. So to call it a fad is sort of like, it is literally the oldest dietary intervention in the book. And in fact, had always been considered to be a healthy thing. Like you don't do fasting for fun. You do it because you think it's a healthy way to sort of cleanse your body or purify your body. And it's not that you should be doing it all the time, but there's a cycle there. There's a balance there between feeding and fasting. In fact, it's even in the English language, right? It's breakfast, the meal that breaks your fast. And you have to fast to break your fast, right? So that's the idea, is that you have to have this balance. But of course, the tone now, of course, is much better. I mean, people are sort of more understanding, a bit more accepting of it. So that's good. That's sort of mission accomplished in some sense, that at least is being seen. Like, to me, it's a sort of tool.
Yeah.
Like, you can use it or you cannot use it. If you use it right, you can do a lot of good. If you use it wrong, you can do a lot of harm. I mean, but in the end, it's just a tool. And we need all the tools that we need, that we can get, because it's, weight loss and type 2 diabetes, it's a serious problem. So we need more tools, and that is one of the tools.
Yeah, absolutely. Having a larger toolbox to, like you said, try to wean people off of medications that they didn't want to be on, and they're willing to put in the work. So when it comes to fasting, is there like a schedule that's best for improving insulin resistance, kind of this blood sugar piece that, maybe it's 12 hours, maybe it's 18, maybe it's a 3-day fast? Is that something that you find that there's like really a sweet spot?
All of them work. It really depends on what it is that you like and what you prefer. Most people do there's two very popular ones. One is 16-8, which is time restricted eating. So you eat during 8 hours of the day and you fast for 16 hours. And so you might eat, for say, from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. or something like that. So and then outside of that, you don't eat. So that's a very popular schedule and relatively easy to fit in a regular sort of day. The idea is not to pack in all that you would normally eat in the 8 hours. The idea is to eat normally within the 8 hours and drop everything else outside of that. Right. So you're going to limit the benefit if you take sort of all of your meals that you would normally eat and just cram them into one giant meal sort of thing. Right. That's not the point. The point is to give your body the time that it's going to take the calories out of that body fat. So if you normally eat, say, 500 calories at breakfast, what you want instead is your body to take those 500 calories out from your breakfast and you to eat a normal lunch and a normal dinner. So that's the sort of one of the more popular schedules and relatively easy to do. And then people also go up to the next most popular, as they extend it, is generally the sort of 24-hour, which is also one meal a day sort of schedule. And that's not necessarily done every day. It's done some days and not done some days. And it's sort of, if you eat sort of from breakfast to breakfast or lunch to lunch or dinner to dinner, that's almost 24 hours of fasting. And again, it's you don't want to sort of cram a huge giant meal in that one meal. You just want to eat sort of regularly whatever you would normally eat. You just drop the other ones. And that's also a very popular schedule, relatively easy to schedule into a normal day as well. If you don't eat breakfast and you work through lunch, well, hey, that's like a 24-hour fast. So that's something that you can also do, and you can change it up and you can see what you like and what you don't like. But those are probably the two most popular schedules. But really anything goes. Like, you could do 3 days, you could do 5 days, you could do 12 hours, you could do 18, you could do anything in between. The key is just not to be eating constantly. That's not what our bodies are supposed to do.
Right. And finding something that works for you and that's going to be able to be used consistently, I would think, as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the key, because if you follow a schedule that you don't like or doesn't fit into your sort of lifestyle, then you're not going to follow it. So that's not really that's not going to work for you. So you might as well try and find something that is, and it's so flexible, right? Fasting is flexible. It doesn't, you don't even have to follow the same schedule sort of week to week if you don't want to, or month to month. So you can do different things and it'll still work, right? And I think that the idea, again, is mostly to find this balance between feeding and fasting, because we had gone so far the other direction, where we had been telling people, you got to eat all the time, right? You need to eat 3 meals plus 3 snacks. It's like, okay, but there's never been any data, there's never been any studies that shows that eating 6, 8, 10 times a day is better for you. In fact, it should be much worse for you, because if you think about it, if you think about how the body works, when you eat, your insulin goes up and your body wants to store those calories, right? That's just what happens, because when you're eating dinner, you're going to take more calories than you can eat, than you can use for the 20 meals that you're, 20 minutes, I should say, that you're taking that meal, right? So you need to store it. So when you eat, your body sends a hormonal signal, store those calories. Now that lasts for a few hours because, of course, the food gets held in the stomach and is slowly released into the system. So even if you eat for 20 minutes, you're sort of in this fed state for a couple of hours because not all of it immediately goes right into your system. But when you get into this sort of fasted state, then your body again sends a signal and said, okay, no more food is coming out. Let's pull those calories that we stored and pull them back out. And that's the reason you don't die in your sleep every single night. So therefore, what you're simply doing is trying to maintain a balance. And we've swung so far into the other direction. That is, never skip breakfast. As soon as you wake up, you gotta start stuffing food into your mouth and keep stuffing food into your mouth all through the day. And then before you go to bed, stuff more food in your mouth to lose weight. And hello. How is that going to work? Like, that doesn't really work because you're constantly signaling your body to store energy, not to burn energy. And that's the point. So, you have to get that balance back.
Right. So mentioning like all these different pathways, because insulin goes up and then we've got other pathways that are downstream. It's not just maybe fat storage, but other signals that go off in the body. So now having written books on insulin, so obesity, all of these different, and including cancer and PCOS. So what are maybe some central themes that you've seen kind of across the board in these disease states that are kind of at the crux of all of them?
Well, the sort of underlying theme of all of these diseases is that they're all diseases of basically too much insulin. Insulin is a nutrient sensor. So when our body senses that there is nutrients, it has a certain specific pathway, and it causes weight gain, obviously, which it also, as your body is sort of jamming in all this excess sugar, then you can get too much sugar, which leads to diabetes. Turns out that excess insulin is also sort of a key factor in PCOS, and that's what causes a lot of the symptoms of PCOS and also cancer. So if your body has a lot of insulin's a very potent growth factor. So it's not causing cancer, but it's a contributor to cancer. So all of these diseases, obesity, diabetes, PCOS, cancer, they're all sort of insulin related. In fact, cancer, for example, there's about 14 cancers that are classified by the World Health Organization as obesity associated cancers, so including breast cancer and colorectal cancer. So it plays a role, this sort of hyperinsulinemia. And it's an interesting way to look at it, because if you say, okay, well, the underlying theme is that, so if insulin is too high, then the obvious question is, how are you going to lower it to reduce all of these diseases? And the answer is, well, you can change the foods that you're eating to eat foods that don't stimulate so much insulin. So cutting down a lot of the refined carbohydrates, for example, and sugar, obviously. And then the other thing is intermittent fasting. If you don't eat at all, then your insulin is going to fall. And that's the sort of the most powerful way to lower insulin. So therefore, if you're looking for something to really, have a bit of oomph, then that's something that you can consider using if you want to.
Yeah. The Healthy Heart Show will be right back after we take this quick break to hear from our sponsor. Would you like to drink great tasting coffee that's also good for your heart health? Cardiology Coffee is your answer. This 5-star rated coffee is delicious. It's a gourmet coffee that begins with whole organic beans, hand-selected and carefully roasted. It's tested and certified to be free of pesticides, mold, and other toxins. Cardiology Coffee is great for your heart, and you're going to love how it tastes. Order now online at cardiologycoffee.com. Now back to the Healthy Heart Show. And so you mentioned how different macronutrients will, of course, trigger different signals in the body. So, and how is it that maybe low fat, so bringing it back to the idea of fad diets, back in the 90s, everything was low fat. So eating all the time, eating low fat. So how do low fat diets really get it wrong?
Well, because they really focused on the calories part of it without focusing on the hormones. So food sort of contains calories, which is the amount of energy. And you have to realize that there's something very important, which is the food also contains information, which is that it when we eat foods, certain hormones go up depending on what food it is. So if you eat a slice of bread, insulin will go up. If you eat an egg, insulin won't really go up. So it contains instructions as to what to do with those calories. So it's very important, because if you all of a sudden have insulin, which is giving you the signal to store body fat, well, then you eat those refined carbohydrates, your body's going to store all that. And therefore, you're going to have a harder time to lose weight. It's not impossible, but it's just harder. So if you eat an egg, for example, then your body doesn't get that signal to store so much body fat, and therefore your body's just going to use those calories as energy. It's going to burn it, right? So your body has a choice to store it or burn it, but which one it does depends on the hormonal status of what your body is telling you to do. So therefore, but people had ignored that. People just said, "Oh, it's calories, calories, calories," right? So the important part of looking at it from both a calorie standpoint and a hormonal standpoint is that, yes, for the same number of calories, certain foods are more fattening than others, which is just obvious. I mean, like your grandmother could have told you, like, if you thought anything different, you're an idiot, sort of thing, right? 100 calories of cookies is very different than 100 calories of broccoli. It just is, right? There's nothing the same about them. But the calories people were all like, "Oh no, it's all calories. It's all calories. It's all calories." They're like, no, 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 no. That's like one part and very small part of the entire thing. And that's why that whole calorie thing sort of fell apart. So we focused on cutting calories, and then we focused on cutting fat, because fat was very high in calories. And therefore we thought we'd be healthier, because there's this idea that cutting fat would make our hearts better. Turns out it was completely false. So after cutting fat for so long, we started to realize that, hey, there's a lot of fats that are actually very, very healthy. And that's where the 2000s came around and people started talking about healthy fats, because before that, you couldn't have a healthy fat. Olive oil, avocados, those were fat and bad for you, right? So nobody ate avocados in the 90s.
Heaven forbid you eat avocados or salmon.
Yeah, God. It was like, I know. It was like considered horrible food, right? Avocados were just the worst food for you. But then nuts were super bad, right? They're high in fat. Then, of course, there's a few studies that came out in the 2000s that showed that eating nuts is actually very healthy for you. Eating whole dairy is actually super healthy for you, right? And that's where people started to talk about the healthy fats. And of course, now it's even gone to the point that a lot of the previously unhealthy fats, the saturated fats, even when they're natural, like in dairy, for example, are very much considered sort of healthy for you. So the low fat sort of regime got it really, really, really wrong. Some of it's being corrected now in that, we're talking more about healthy fats. We're so much less concerned with the total fat in the diet. And the thing about the calories is still there. There's a lot of misconceptions around there, but it's not simply the number of calories. It's also the sort of type of calories. The type of calories, of course, which is the most important thing, is like, what effect does it have on our hormones? Then that's where people really got it wrong. And fasting, of course, does two things. It causes you to lower the number of calories, but also changes the hormonal status of your body. That is, it drops your insulin so that you can now access your stores of body fat. If you don't drop your insulin, you actually can't burn your body fat. I mean, it's just because your body's signaling to store fat, don't burn it. So right. It's very hard to lose weight when your insulin's high. Like if we give insulin as a prescription, people gain weight because that's the instructions you're giving the body.
Yeah, literally flip that switch, and so that fat deposition is just triggered. And then like when we're talking about fats, people really, they feel more satiated. They have the ability to have these prolonged hours without eating because that they have, all of these things from their foods that are necessary, that are healthy for them, and that it's not triggering this whole hormonal cascade, which, it's no wonder that we have these hormone associated disease states coming from insulin, coming from our food, where, like we said, in the 90s, and I think maybe even some people still do subscribe to the ideas of eating, 5 chicken breasts a day to lose weight. and still having some hormonal issues when it's like, no, have yourself like a grass-fed ribeye and like really enjoy it. And I think that
Yeah.
saturated fats is something that I come across a lot in practice that people just are really resistant to hearing and resistant to accepting.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole idea really is that you want to focus on sort of natural foods. So a food such as steak or something, grass-fed steak is a natural food. Our bodies know what to do with that. It's really when you start to create these sort of highly processed foods that you're more likely to get into trouble with. I mean, that was the big mistake, of course, of the low fat movement, was that the government actually encouraged food companies to make processed foods that were lower in fat than natural foods. So you had low fat this, low fat that, of course. But they weren't natural foods. So therefore people were, your bodies didn't know what to do with it, and therefore probably suffered from it. Like, obviously there's a big change since the 70s, because obesity rates just skyrocketed after that, and part of it was that we really encouraged the use of processed foods rather than sort of natural foods. We evolved with foods like meats and so on, right? So you can eat a very varied diet and still be quite healthy, but if it's all processed, then it's going to be hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And largely in food processing, especially when they're removing some of the calories from fat or bringing the fat down lower, they're replacing it to make it more palatable with sugars and other carbohydrates. It's got to be something.
Yeah. Yeah, and the problem is, of course, that you're then doing like something which is, say, highly concentrated. And so, for example, if you take carbohydrates and you take out all the protein and you take out all the fat and then you grind it up, so that's how you get flour, of course. And it's very, very highly concentrated, ultra pure form of carbohydrate that doesn't exist in nature. So it's like, okay, well, now it's easy to get into trouble. I mean, it's sort of like this whole breast milk thing, right? In the 70s, people thought that we could make a better breast milk than breast milk, right? So everybody gave their kids formula because it was better than breast milk, right? And it took a huge coordinated campaign, which most people don't probably remember, which is the breast is best. I mean, it sounds so it's like, well, that's obvious. No, it wasn't obvious. It was a huge campaign that took years to change people's minds back to the fact that breast milk is actually much healthier than formula. You use formula if you don't have breast milk, it's no problem. But breast is best. It took like 5 years of, campaign after campaign after campaign to get it through to people. It's the same thing. We think that we can make a better food than natural food. So it's like, if you eat, carbohydrates, natural carbohydrates, and there are a number of them, and lots of people have eaten them. We process it into pure carbohydrates, saying, oh, that's better. Or if you eat, protein, instead of eating a steak, oh, let's get this concentrated whey powder that you can throw into a shake. And it's like, it might be okay for you, but it's highly processed and in a form that really doesn't exist in nature. So you're much more likely to run into problems drinking a powdered shake every day instead of eating food. It's just the way it is.
Yeah. And then how many studies have now come out about the benefits of breastfeeding since this whole campaign? And it's like, we just have to realize we got to get out of our own way. We cannot top nature. We never will.
Absolutely.
So back to this kind of idea of, calorie counting. So calorie counting versus calorie restriction. And so, of course, when you're having time restricted eating, so you're doing intermittent fasting, of course, you're, like you said, you're going to skip those maybe 500 calories from breakfast. So it's not just the avoidance of some hours, it's the avoidance of some calories as a whole. And I know that you talk about this in talking about longevity, that if we have this calorie restriction, and maybe you can talk about this group of people was it Japan, that stop eating at 80% full, and their longevity has just shown so much benefit for that.
Yeah, so if you look from a animal standpoint, calorie restriction is probably the best studied way to increase longevity. So you notice it in all these animal studies. So rats, for example, if you give one group, let them eat as much as they want, and the other group, you only give them a certain amount. But the group that is calorie restricted actually lives much longer and lives much healthier. So it's, and keeping in mind again that it's sort of ultra processed rat chow that they're getting. But the idea is that this is a fairly consistent finding. And even as far as back as the 40s, people said, well, you can do it two ways, right? You can either restrict your food every single time. And this is what they do in Okinawa, where there's this tradition of sort of stopping eating when you're 80% full. So they deliberately do this, and their longevity is actually very, very good. And the other way to do it is simply to restrict the number of times that you eat, because when you eat, you tend to eat a certain amount. And if you, so therefore you can restrict your calories by sort of uh, taking, 3 meals a day and eating a little less each meal, or you can eat 2 meals a day and eat sort of your full regular meal sort of thing, right? So both are adequate strategies, but the natural thing for most people to do is to eat until you're full. That's sort of the way that people generally eat. So that's why a lot of people find that the intermittent fasting is a much more effective sort of real life strategy than the other, which is to stop eating, all the time. I mean, this whole idea of grazing throughout the day, right? I mean, it's a crazy idea to even think about, because one, it's never been used before. Like, we've never been in a situation in history where people just ate all the time. Like, there's work to be done. You cannot be just looking for food all the time. It's like you have a
Get
job.
kicked out of the clan.
And so the other thing is that when you eat, you're actually stimulating your appetite. That's why you eat an appetizer, right? So you eat because a little bit of food is going to start, thinking about food. You're going to start salivating. So a little bit of food actually makes you more hungry. So that's what an appetizer does. We've known this for ages, right? So if you eat like an appetizer portion of food and then stop yourself and do this 10 times a day, well, why would you, like, aren't you just making it your life like really hard?
Yeah.
Like, you're going to stimulate your appetite, then you're not going to eat, then you're going to do it again in 2 hours, and again and again and again. Like, why don't you simply don't do that? Because it's crazy. If you want to lose weight, why don't you simply cut down the number of times you're eating to two? The other times you can forget about it. Will you get hungry? Yes, you will. But then you just forget about it, do something else, and that's going to pass.
Mhm.
So it's a much better strategy than to constantly having to think about it. Like, and again, 10 years ago, this was sort of conventional wisdom that this is what you needed to do. And it was so unsuccessful. It was like spectacularly unsuccessful. And the thing is that you're constantly having to think about food. Well, if
Challenging.
you're trying to lose weight, the last thing you really want to do is constantly think about food. Like, you're setting yourself up for an incredible failure, because you're always thinking, okay, well, what am I going to do for my snack? What am I going to do for lunch? What am I going to do for my afternoon snack? What am I going to do for dinner? What am I going to do for my bedtime snack? And it's like, okay, now that you're thinking about food, you're going to want to eat some. And when you do get to eating it, you're going to want to eat more, but you have to stop yourself, right? And like, okay, well, that's just it doesn't even make sense from a life standpoint to
Yeah.
do that.
Willpower.
Yeah, you're constantly sapping your willpower because you've decided on this strategy that involves deliberately thinking about food and then deliberately not eating until you're full, and doing it over and over again in a day. So it's like, it could work if you want it to, but it's just not easy.
Yeah. Making it a lot harder on yourself and something that's already challenging to do.
Yeah.
So say you're eating here. Okay. So out of sight, out of mind is probably a better way to do it. So you're just having a couple meals a day, you're doing your intermittent fasting. But so what I come across is patients try to get this physical activity in. So then they say, okay, I'm hungrier when I exercise. So then do you still suggest that patients would eat to the same kind of fulfillment level? So say, 100% is what they eat at any given meal, but then they just feel hungrier and maybe they're more prone to overeating, or is it just still the same level of, no, I feel full, so I'll stop?
Generally, after exercise is actually, I mean, you can certainly do exercise while you're fasting. Your body knows what to do with itself. Like, we think our body is just so stupid, but really, if you're exercising and you haven't eaten, your body will take the energy it needs from your stores, your sugar stores or your fat stores, and that's it. Exercise in general overall makes you a little bit more hungry. So whether you're fasting or not, that doesn't change it. So the fasting is actually a very good strategy to be using during fasting, just because it actually works very well if you're, so people generally fast and then they exercise. So you exercise on an empty stomach, which is a little bit more effective because then you're making sure that you use the stores of energy, that the sugar, the body fat. And then the other thing that happens is that when we fast, growth hormone and norepinephrine, so sympathetic tone, goes up. So it's actually your body actually has more energy to do the exercise, and the growth hormone is going to make sure that you recover a little bit faster. So there's actually advantages to fasting and exercise that sort of go together. It's a balance there, of course. You can't, you have to have enough calories if you're an elite athlete, for example. But if for most people, they have more than enough of that. So yeah, it doesn't make much difference in terms of the fasting and the exercise. You can do it, you can exercise and fast, or if you're, it just doesn't, it's not a contraindication. It doesn't stop you from doing it.
Good. That's good information to know. Thank you. And then I wanted to ask a question that I ask all of our guests on our show is, how do you live a heart healthy lifestyle?
Well, I try to, to me, the most important things is, trying to, there's a few, right? There's the weight, of course, which is, trying to make sure that you're balanced with not just the foods that you eat, but also making sure you're not eating all the time. The other thing, of course, is to try to exercise as much as you can. It's never very easy to do. But then there's a lot of other things, like as managing stress levels and so on. So those are, to me, the most important things. Getting regular checkups is important for blood pressure and all that kind of thing as well. And that's not really necessarily diet related. A lot of people have high blood pressure anyway, but it is something that is really important. And probably one of the more important things over the last sort of 50 years is good control of the blood pressure has probably played a big role in decreasing the incidence of heart disease, kidney disease, and all of that sort of thing. So making sure they get your blood pressure checked and all that sort of thing.
And I know we see it here in practice pretty regularly that intermittent fasting does actually really help with the blood pressure coming down.
Yeah, there's actually, it does play a role. It's not the only thing that causes high blood pressure, but it does play a role in high blood pressure. So so certainly it can, because when you don't eat, insulin falls. Insulin tends to make your body retain water, so therefore your pressure tends to go up. So as you start to fast, you can notice a bit of a diuretic effect, and your pressure can come down somewhat. So it can be effective for that. And we've seen it as well in people coming off their medications for blood pressure and so on.
Awesome. Well, tell our listeners where they can find more about you and read all of your wonderful books and all of the incredible information that you've put out to the world. I just have, again, just been a follower for a long time, and I know that we could go on and on and on, but we want to make this a nice, easyable, digestible listening episode for everybody. So where can everybody find more about you?
Yeah, so you can I have a YouTube channel, just look under Jason Fung. There's a lot of information there. There's the books. You can go to thefastingmethod.com, where we have there's some coaching available and a community for fasting, which is often helpful. You can also follow me on Twitter at Dr. Jason Fung.
Awesome. Well, thank you so very much for your time. It's really been a great time having you on here today. Thank you, everybody listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a comment and let us know what you like. And we will catch you next time on another episode of The Healthy Heart Show. That does it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to The Healthy Heart Show. Please help us get the word out by liking and subscribing to our podcast and our Facebook page, Natural Heart Doctor. Please show support for our podcast sponsor, Cardiology Coffee, your resource for organic, antioxidant-rich, mold and pesticide-free coffee shipped straight to your door. Learn more by adding @Cardiology Coffee on Instagram and visiting cardiologycoffee.com. This podcast provides materials for information and educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. We encourage you to contact your physician for any of the health issues discussed here.